Let's take a look at some urine characteristics. In terms of composition, urine is mostly water, but it does contain several metabolic wastes. One of the metabolic wastes that may appear in urine are ketones. And ketones typically only appear when we're using a lot of fat for energy. This is typically seen when someone is on a low carbohydrate diet or if they have diabetes that's unregulated. During diabetes, the cells are not taking in glucose, so they have to use fats for energy instead, and that produces the ketone bodies. When someone is consuming a low carbohydrate diet, they are also not taking in glucose, so they have to use fats for energy instead. Ketone bodies are also seen in urine during malnutrition, and this is basically because the body is using whatever sources it can in order to produce energy, and a lot of times that's going to be fat. Other things found in urine include various ions, like chloride ions, potassium ions, and hydrogen ions, drugs, and more. In terms of color, urine, of course, is supposed to be a pale yellow color. And this yellow color is coming from urobilin. And urobilin is coming from urobilinogen, which ultimately is coming from hemoglobin. When we break down hemoglobin, we have that porphyrin ring that has to be removed from the body, and it is converted into urobilinogen, which is secreted into the kidneys, and then that urobilinogen is converted into urobilin, and the urobilin is yellow, which is what makes urine yellow. Other color characteristics, or visual characteristics really, include whether or not the urine is cloudy. So you should be able to see through the urine. If it's too cloudy, that can be indicative of bacteria. Hematuria is when there is blood in the urine, so it gives it a slightly red color. If you take a look at this picture here, we can see one normal urine sample and then a urine sample that's red. And if you were saying the red one is hematuria, you would actually be wrong, because this particular urine sample is red, caused by someone eating too many beets. So don't always associate red urine with blood, but typically that's usually what it means. Alkaptonuria is black urine, which is something that's not good, right? This is caused by a genetic disorder, and this particular genetic disorder means individuals are lacking an enzyme. And without this enzyme, when the urine is released from the body, it's actually yellow, but as it contacts the oxygen in the atmosphere, it becomes oxidized and it turns black. In terms of urine output, the minimum output is a half a liter per day, though we typically produce about a liter of urine per day. Polyuria would be producing too much urine. Oliguria is producing too little urine, so less than 500 milliliters a day. And anuria means not making any urine, which is very bad because then we are not having our kidneys function at all. We spent most of our time on the urinary system talking about the kidneys, but now let's take a look at what the other organs are doing for the urinary system. We know that the ureters are going to deliver urine from the kidneys to the anterior bladder. So basically what this is saying is that the bladder is going to fill from the bottom up. Renal caliculi is another name for kidney stones. And these kidney stones can form and block the ureter or other places in the urinary system too. The function of the urinary bladder is to store urine until we have an appropriate time and location for the elimination of urine. The urinary bladder does not adjust the composition of urine in any way, shape, or form. It only holds the urine for elimination purposes. In the wall of the urine is a muscle called the detrusor muscle, and this is a type of smooth muscle, so it's not under conscious control. During the process of micturition, the detrusor muscle will contract, squeezing the urine out of the bladder into the urethra. And the job of the urethra is to convey the urine to outside the body. The urethra has two sphincters associated with it, the external and internal urethral sphincters. The internal urethral sphincter is located right where the bladder and the urethra meet. And the internal sphincter is under unconscious control. So we don't have any conscious control over this. Now, when that internal urethral sphincter relaxes, the urine will move out of the bladder into the urethra. But that doesn't mean that we are urinating yet, because we still have another sphincter that the urine has to cross. And this is the external urethral sphincter. And this sphincter we do have conscious control over. This is a skeletal muscle. As children, we have to learn to control that muscle in order to control our urination. So it takes some time what's really happening there is to develop the nervous system that will coordinate with that muscle to help control the process of urination. Micturition is the fancy name for urine elimination, or otherwise known as going pee. Micturition is stimulated by stretch receptors. When the bladder fills to about 150 milliliters, this will activate the stretch receptors in the wall of the bladder. And the stretch receptors send signals to the spinal cord. And the spinal cord is actually going to be the source of our micturition center. This is where we will coordinate our process of micturition at the level of the spinal cord. The spinal cord will in turn send signals to the detrusor muscle, causing it to contract. And it will also signal the internal urethral sphincter to relax. At this point, this is when you're like, okay, I really have to go pee. Or you have that urgency to urinate. But we aren't urinating yet because the cerebral cortex helps us to consciously control the external urethral sphincter. We can actually push off the process of micturition until the bladder gets to about 300 to 400 milliliters full. At that point, our voluntary constraints will fail and the process of urination will occur whether or not we want it to. Urinary incontinence is the word we use to describe an inability to control the process of urination. And this can be caused by many things. It's very common in aging. The detrusor muscle itself ages, and that can lead to urinary incontinence. A very common thing in males is prostate enlargement. The urethra runs through the center of the prostate gland. So if the prostate enlarges, it will squeeze on that urethra, and that will result in variations in urinary incontinence. It's always important to talk about diabetes when we talk about the urinary system. The term diabetes is actually just referring to conditions in the body that result in polyuria, or too much urine being produced. There are different types of diabetes. You've probably heard about type 1 and type 2 diabetes, but there are other forms too, like diabetes insipidus and gestational diabetes. And again, they all result in producing too much urine. With type 1 diabetes, we have an autoimmune disorder that is basically killing the pancreatic cells that make insulin. Without insulin, the cells of the body don't know when to take glucose in, and the blood glucose levels get very high, which means that the glucose levels in the tubular fluid are high. They're so high that we can't even reabsorb all of the glucose. And that glucose acts as an osmotic agent, drawing water out of the body into the tubular fluid, causing the polyuria. With type 2 diabetes, the same thing happens with the polyuria. Too much glucose in the blood means too much glucose in the tubular fluid, which means we reabsorb too much water. But the cause here isn't a lack of insulin. It's being caused by the fact that our insulin is not meshing well with our insulin receptors. In this case, we have what's known as insulin resistance. Diabetes insipidus is pretty rare, and this is caused by a lack of antidiuretic hormone. Without the antidiuretic hormone, we have essentially a diuretic situation in the body, and diuretics, of course, make you go pee, which means polyuria. Gestational diabetes is something that occurs during pregnancy in some individuals, and it's kind of similar to type 2 diabetes in a way. It goes away, though, after the baby is born. Renal insufficiency is what happens when our nephrons are destroyed and our kidneys can no longer filter blood. And this can be caused by a lot of different things. It can be caused by drugs, it can be caused by diseases such as sickle cell anemia, it can be caused by damage to the kidneys. Many different things can result in this. If someone has renal insufficiency, then they require dialysis in order to remove waste from their blood and then return the clean blood to their body. Dialysis takes time, it takes equipment, it means you have to leave your house. It's a huge impediment on people's ordinary lifestyle. Peritoneal dialysis is a form of dialysis that allows individuals to stay home for the process of dialysis. What it does is it introduces a hypertonic solution to the peritoneal cavity. So basically, individuals will have a port put in their abdomen, which leads to the peritoneal cavity. And then you can add hypertonic solutions to the peritoneal cavity. And the hypertonic solutions act as an osmotic agent, pulling water towards them. And the wastes come along with the water. So basically, the peritoneal cavity now starts to fill with water and waste from the blood. When the process is complete, this fluid, which is now highly concentrated with waste, will be removed through that same port. So the process of dialysis is happening in their own body.